So yeah, I'm here today talking about Blackstone Minerals and our Khoa project in northern Vietnam. So just to talk a little bit about the overall investment summary in Blackstone. So we're developing a fully integrated mine through to refinery in the north of Vietnam. Now, what we're looking for our own mine, which is the Khoa mine, which was previously called the Ban Phuc nickel mine, which would take our nickel ore, make a concentrate, and then turn that to a nickel sulphate through to a PCAM product in our refinery, which is a feedstock feeding into the lithium-ion battery process. We have a globally significant nickel sulphide mineral resource with a probable reserve. We've got first quartile cost position for production of sulphate, as well as lowest carbon footprint. The reason we talk about sulphate, I'll explain that in a couple of slides' time, but there's a differentiation in the technology beyond sulphate, so it's really hard to compare apples with apples when you're looking at the overall production costs. So we're going to look to develop a partnership model, working with technology providers as well as potential funders through the EV supply chain. And we're, Blackstone, like all the other nickel people talking today, are developing a project which will be supplying into a rising macroeconomic environment through the overall shortages that's been discussed, which I'm not going to touch on today. So a little snapshot about who Blackstone is. So we trade on the ASX under the code BSX, but we also are trading the OTC. We have current share prices a bit above 14 cents, but market cap of just over $60 to $70 million at the moment, with an additional $10.7 million in listed investments in 3 other nickel companies, as well as one which we spun out late last year. In terms of our overall shareholdings, so we've got a major institutional investor through Fidelity taking up 8%. We've got an individual through Deutsche Börse as well, it's taking up 15%, and a couple of other major institutions as well on our books. So a bit about our project. So we're in the north of Vietnam. So Hanoi is the capital city, and so we're about 130 kilometres to the west of Hanoi. There's 2 parts to our project. The upstream mine, where we're looking at an open pit to produce nickel concentrate, and the downstream refinery. So the open pit concentrate will be about 200,000 tonnes a year production of concentrate containing 20,000 tonnes of nickel, which will go into our downstream refinery, which will look to take additional 20,000 tonnes a year of nickel products, be it either concentrate or MHP, to make sulphate, and then into the PCAM NCM 811 product. So key facts about our project that need to really be driven home is the fact that we're an integrated producer of low-cost, low-carbon nickel. So we've got a total life cycle assessment being completed on our product, indicating 9.8 kilos of carbon dioxide per kilo of PCAM, which has been recognised by the Nickel Institute as the lowest carbon footprint flow sheet in the world for producing PCAM. Through the integration of mining and refining, we actually looked at overall great efficiencies in the overall flow sheet, minimising costs, as well as we're backed up by a 485,000 tonne nickel sulphide resource. I won't talk about the nickel market deficit. I think that's been discussed enough so far, but I think that's something that's going to benefit all nickel players looking forward. One key point of difference is the operation in Vietnam. We'll talk about it a bit more in another slide, but right now, Vietnam is a huge mecca for investment, with over $27 billion been invested in 2022 through foreign direct investment. So our overall business model is structured like this. We're going to look to find nickel products and secure nickel products through our Khoa nickel project and through our 3 strategic investments in Nico, which is a nickel laterite in central Western Australia, also Corazon, which owns the Lynn Lake project, and Flying Nickel, which is the Monago project. So we'll look to secure nickel through these assets to deliver into our refinery, but we'll also look to engage with other third-party providers such as Trafigura to make sure we get to the total 40,000 tonnes per year target. We'll take that material, put it through our refinery, and then we'll convert that into the PCAM product, which will be fed into the likes of the battery makers such as LG, Samsung, and all the names you recognise. So we're targeting a net zero overall project here. And our green nickel strategy is really founded off these 6 principles. Sulphide nickel. Sulphide nickel is critical to this strategy, given the fact that the sulphide nickel flow sheet inherently has less demand for carbon through power, less power demand, and it generates its own heat. The vertical integration of the value chain minimises any carbon along the way through transportation, as well as utilising projects in locations with renewable power will give us access to low carbon footprint power. We're utilising a pressure oxidation flow sheet, which utilises the fact that the nickel sulphide generates energy and heat through the reaction process, which then is used for other parts of the overall flow sheet. We're replacing fossil fuel through our mining fleet, and then we've also got a global corporate commitment to ESG. So a bit more about why the jurisdiction advantage of Vietnam is so important. As I mentioned earlier, sorry, I need to update the number there, but the foreign direct investment in Vietnam is actually just over $27 billion in 2022. This is up from $1.3 billion in the year 2000. The cost competitiveness in Vietnam is probably one of the best in the world. The overall operating cost in Vietnam, for example, labour costs are half of what they are in China. Power costs will sit between 6 and 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And the cost of actually building a project in Vietnam is one of the lowest in the world. We have access to a huge amount of renewable power. So the overall grid makeup in Vietnam is approximately 50% renewable already, and we sit between two of the largest hydro dams in Southeast Asia. Our other advantage is the fact that we actually have an existing project. The concentrator you can see on the screen is our Khoa concentrator. This was operating back in sort of around 2016 and treats about 450,000 tonnes a year of nickel feed to make about 5 to 10,000 tonnes a year of nickel in concentrate. We have the option to turn this back on with some of our satellite deposits, but we have a footprint in ground, we have established relationships with the community and an ongoing mining licence, which allows us to really turn this on and sort of develop this project with great advantage through those relationships. So talking about the cost advantages of the project, so we got first quartile costs for nickel sulphate. So the nickel sulphate curve is really it's broken up between the producers which make via a laterite and out of Indonesia, which really dominate the low end of the cost curve, and then those who create go all the way to making a nickel metal and then releach that to make a nickel sulphate. So we are we'll have one of the first pro flow sheets which goes from nickel sulphide in the ground straight the way through to nickel sulphate. And in doing that, we cut out the inefficiency of needing to go through a pyrometallurgical flow sheet and keep up the costs overall much lower than a lot of the other competition out there. We do have a roadmap to get to zero carbon. So we completed our LCA with a company called Minviro based out of the UK. We delivered an overall analysis which gave us about 9.8 kilos of carbon per kilo PCAM. Now, we can drop that by another 2.4 kilos just by signing a power purchase agreement with the power suppliers in Vietnam. That's something we're currently working on at the moment, but we haven't secured it yet, so we weren't able to include it in our LCA. Looking at alternate sources of cobalt will help us drop another 0.7. And then as we flow down that chart, there's a lot of opportunities for us to get to zero carbon, but the main point is we do assume that we'll need some offsets at the end, but they will really just fill the balance of what we're not able to achieve. We'll also look to use the carbon mineralisation. That's a couple of the other speakers have spoken about so far today. And I think that all nickel producers looking to deliver into the EV space need to consider their carbon footprint and a way to get to zero carbon. So a little bit about our resource. So our resource is the Khoa nickel project. The resource sits at about 130 million tonnes at 0.37% nickel for a combined total of 485,000 tonnes of nickel. The Ban Phuc disseminated is really underpins that with that 123 million tonnes at 0.37 for 452,000 tonnes of nickel. We've got a lot of active targets currently in Vietnam where we are looking to drill and develop these out. Many of these are much smaller, higher grade, massive sulphide targets, which don't add the same nickel units that would probably be added through the large disseminated targets, but they do add valuable sulphur, copper and PGE credits which come through to our final product. So a bit about the mine itself. So we've got a probable reserve of about 48.7 million tonnes at 0.43% nickel for 210,000 tonnes of contained nickel. Now, when we went through this resource, we're quite brutal in the fact that we've got the same amount of nickel sitting between 0.25% nickel and 0.3% nickel and 0.2% nickel. But we arbitrarily cut it at 0.25 because we didn't feel that we had enough test work supporting the lower recoveries. So we've spent a lot of time in the last 12 months doing test work at the lower grades to try and support that as we lead in to deliver our DFS in the middle of this year. The pit design is a very efficient pit design. The fact that we're sitting on the top of the hill as we draw down the sides of the hill as well. So we end up with a relatively low strip ratio of 2.9. The fact that we have an existing mining operation really supports this project. We've got existing camp, underground operation, and the 450,000 tonne per annum mill, and the overall supportive community just really benefits all the exploration work and development we've done so far. Now, I'm a metallurgist, so I will not talk you to boredom through this flow sheet, but I'll just say if anyone actually is interested to hear a bit about the flow sheet and what happens, come see me after. But the overall flow sheet is actually not that complex. The first half on the left is a conventional nickel concentrator where you will crush, grind, float it and make a concentrate. We take that concentrate with third-party concentrates and we put it through a pressure oxidation flow sheet. Pretty much everything after the pink flash vessel that you see at the top there is just a purification stage. So it's not actually that complex and there's no real novel technologies. We are using POX on a sulphide which has been used for 60 years, and then we're looking at pretty much at solvent extraction and crystallization processes. One of the major advantages of our project is actually the flexibility of supply. So our refinery has been designed around receiving nickel concentrate, but also MHP products, nickel matte and black mass. So this really gives us confidence long term that we'll be able to source whatever nickel materials are in the market and then bring them to our project to create our sulphate through to PCAM products. How are we confident in this? We've actually completed a piloting program. So we've done that at ALS Laboratories in Perth over the last 12 months, where we've run for in excess of 1,800 hours with a variety of different feed blends, including about 10 tonnes that was produced from Banfook. We didn't treat it all, but we made 10 tonnes of concentrate from our Banfook ore, as well as concentrates coming from Trafigura and other potential feed partners. We were able to achieve great recoveries through this material and in excess of what we expected based on our pre-feasibility study and successfully made battery-grade nickel sulphates. Concentrator piloting is happening as well on site in Vietnam. We've got an independent expert from a company in Perth called GR Engineering. They're a very experienced concentrator designer, and they've come to really run our flow sheet development process to make sure that it's independent and also is going to deliver what we want. We were able to do this through a bulk sample drive. We actually did a 1,200 metre drive from the existing underground workings through the open pit where it's going to be, and generated about 3,500 to 4,000 tonnes of ore that we then processed through the existing concentrator. But doing this, we saw some great scale up around our pilot plant, around the pilot plant we have on site, as well as the commercial plant, where we saw improved recoveries over what we saw in the laboratory. So what's it mean over the next 12 months at Blackstone? So we're going to continue to de-risk the project through finishing off our piloting programs and our engineering. We're going to complete the DFS by sort of expecting July this year, and then continue to improve the fundability of the project by securing our partners. So we're having regular discussions with potential partners out of South Korea, Japan, and then even some of the major strategics out of Australia, to really find the right people to work with us to help us deliver this project. As we do that, we look to basically launch into a final investment decision later this year and start development of the project. So that's it, everyone. Thank you.